9 comes to us courtesy of a guy named Shane Acker, a talented visual effects artist who turned to making his own animated shorts, one of which he's now expanded into a titular feature. And while Acker is indeed the rising star of the show, the film's backers have understandably placed a greater marketing emphasis onto the two better-known guys who've served as executive producers and walking dispensers of genre street cred on the project, namely Tim Burton, whose name they're hoping will invoke happy memories of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Timur Bekmambetov, whose name they're hoping will not invoke memories of Wanted. More broadly, it represents the latest stab at making mature animation commercially viable in the US film market, which isn't to say that 9 is anywhere near as adult-oriented as the underrated Beowulf from a year or so back, but even with its adorable ragdoll protagonist and simplistic child-friendly story, it's quite a bit darker than most other theatrical cartoons. Either way, mature animation has always had a tough time of it since its reliable audience is pretty damn small, and lately it's only gotten smaller, as the discussion has largely been hijacked by a subset of zealots who are of the mind that there's simply no such thing as relevant mature animation, unless of course it originates in Japan. You know who I'm talking about. Not all otakus, Lord no. I mean the mall-crawling little Akihabara wannabe pissants who, when they're not setting up base camp in the middle of the fucking manga aisle at Barnes & Noble, just love nothing more than to explain to you how there's nothing anyone can do in the art or entertainment world that wasn't already done a million times better in some 900-episode anime that even Japan didn't give a shit about. It's the arrogance that gets me, you know? Lose the attitude and stop acting like a kawaii knit cap and a new type subscription makes you some kind of animation expert. Now then, if you're wondering why I feel I can take time out for a digression about anime snobs, well, unfortunately it's because there isn't a whole lot to be said about 9 other than looks amazing. There's no denying that Shane Acker is a visionary, that the film is obviously a labor of love, and that its visual design and execution are a wonder to behold. An entire world rendered in a fascinating stylistic hybrid somewhere between steampunk and an art supply store, but beyond all that purely technical praise, there's not a lot to be said for good or ill about anything else. The overall plot is as basic as they come, a rote post-apocalypse cautionary tale with two teams of good and bad robots fighting over a magical doodad with the power to save the world. And the actual story isn't much more than a linear succession of 4 admittedly excellent monster battles leading up to an ending that doesn't really make a lot of sense and probably isn't supposed to. The characters are arch, simplistic, and one note, and what few surprises and twists there are disappointingly easy to guess, unless of course you've seen the trailers, in which case you won't have to guess, you've already seen them. You know, I really hate the fact that I'm sounding like a wet blanket here, guys. I mean, believe me, I was looking forward to this one too. And it's not like there isn't a lot to enjoy here. It's one of the best and most unique-looking films, animated or otherwise, you're going to see this year. It's got a solid voice cast, and the action is remarkably inventive and well-directed. It just doesn't add up to much on a narrative level, and in a way, all that visual loveliness compounds the problem. It looks so original, it's all the more noticeable that everything else isn't. In fact, it's just kind of standard and predictable. So, yeah, 9 is really only about halfway to a great movie, but that's halfway further than a lot of films get, and even with reservations about the plot and structure, on balance, I'm going to say it's worth a look. You know, you could do a lot worse.
So has this thing had any kind of following or reappraisal recently? I feel like it had a lot of hype when it came out, and then it didn't pop, and it felt like it dropped right off, and Shane Acker has mostly had projects announced that didn't get out of development since then, which is unfortunate. This whole era of reviews has been weird overall to revisit, because you can almost feel the late 70s industry and transition vibes happening, but without any kind of, collective organized film school renegade insurgents like there was back then with Coppola's crew. In this case, you had the Age of Avengers only having just getting started, and the rest of the industry hadn't really figured out that was going to be the new paradigm yet. It was all very strange. But I feel like especially if this was going to have a resurgence, it would have in the animation circles, because if anyone can make a new cult classic out of marginally interesting material, it would be animators. But, if there was going to be an itch to be scratched for something like this, I feel like Mad God would be the one scratching it, and that's a much better, more recent, more recently released, actually begun work earlier movie that's out now, the Phil Tippett production. Take a look at that, obviously, if you haven't yet. But yet another one where I was surprised to remember that this existed.